Hello and welcome to the American Cinema Foundation Movie Podcast. I'm your host, Titus, and today I am joined by Michael Russell Gunn to discuss his new movie about Ronald Reagan and the Reykjavik meeting between Gorbachev and Reagan in '86, arms reduction, nuclear war threats, the end of the Cold War, the culmination of a generation of American foreign policy efforts after the Second World War, and the moment, of course, when American dominance became American supremacy or hegemony, or the unipolar moment, as Charles Krauthammer famously called it, and then the very important thing to reflect on now, but also a surprise of a movie. There's a lot to talk about with Reagan and the history, on the other hand, with the movie. But first, I would like to ask you first, actually, thank you for coming on. It's very good to see you, Michael. And second of all, please introduce yourself to our audience. I believe this is your first, it's not your first feature, it's your second, I think, or sophomore effort, but you have mostly worked in TV, and this is the first time where you get to really work your craft in cinema as a producer and writer and director at the same time. This seems like this was your baby, as we say. So, in a sense, it's the most you're going to be. Your vision is on screen now, and it's a rare kind of movie. Not a lot of nuclear war, Cold War pictures, not a lot of tense negotiation dramas with the CIA and the KGB in the basement of a house in, of all places, Iceland. So you have staked out some kind of strange but very powerful territory in which to tell your version of this story. So, how did we get to this? How did you get to this? Introduce yourself, please, for our audience.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to be here, and yeah, I mean, it's funny you say my second feature because I think I for years I tried to get IMDb to take down the one I made in film school, but I guess technically it is because it was that long, but it was like an extended short. I think it was like 80 minutes long, and somebody kept saying like, well, is that a feature? Is it not a feature? I was like, I don't know. I don't know what qualifies these days. So I think for most people, at least in the business, they consider this the debut. We'll see what IMDb says. They ruled the internet, but yeah, look, I came up in television as you mentioned, and always wanted to do film work, and had been writing films for years and years, and then this one kind of came into being and was something that I love working with actors, and so I wanted to direct. Mainly I love Star Wars and the Bruckheimer films and Marvel films and everything, but I'm probably best suited to kind of the acting, performance-based movies. And so this is something I really wanted to do, and it was obviously a message that I really believed in, and I thought that, it's kind of an incredible moment in history that I think most people don't know about. I certainly didn't know about it, and it turned out to be incredibly tense. It was one of these things where I got the transcripts, and the transcripts themselves, read like, fiction. You can't believe these guys are in a room arguing about if they're going to launch nuclear weapons at each other or not. So, it's pretty gripping just in that fact alone.
Yeah, I think that in a way, it's stranger that we don't have a lot of historical fiction, since it does have this something in common with the social media world, where we feel that events are coming at us live. Maybe here on my phone, it's happening right
Hmm.
now. Everybody's talking about it. It's a little crazy, but these things used to happen at this much larger scale. They involved the two superpowers. They involved, in some
Yeah.
sense, the destiny of mankind. It was not so much a viral moment. It was more of civilization is at stake. So
Yes.
somehow more serious. And it's and the movie, The Brink of War, if you say, there's popcorn movies and there's Oscar movies, this is an Oscar movie. And part of what's so remarkable about it, and in this case, Oscar is a good thing. You put together a great cast. So since you
Yeah.
think of yourself as working more with actors in terms of your skill
Yeah.
set, your abilities, where direction works best for you,
Yeah.
tell us a bit about how did you put together at least this triangle. You've got Jeff Daniels playing Reagan. I
Hmm.
didn't believe that this was going to work when I heard that it was happening. It took me a few minutes to get into it because first
Yeah.
it's Jeff Daniels.
Yes.
But then, I learned to appreciate him as an actor all over again to see how he brings
Yeah.
out Reagan.
Yeah.
I felt even a little apprehensive. Like, you have to be as an actor somehow sympathetic. Does this guy even
Yes.
like Reagan? Turns out
Yeah.
he somehow really wanted and was really able to get inside and bring out his humor, obviously, but also his principled stance and therefore certain combativeness. Peace
Yeah.
through strength involves strength also.
Yeah.
It was a remarkable performance, a surprise to me, a very pleasant surprise, and it made me think more about this. You've got Reagan, Jeff Daniels, but Jared Harris,
Mm.
this great guy,
Oh.
from again popcorn movies. That would be, I guess, he was the antagonist in Sherlock Holmes. Want to go on the other stage, he was in Chernobyl, the great
Yeah.
HBO series, great actor, and he plays Gorbachev. And of course, then there's at Reagan's right hand, Schultz, played by J.K. Simmons, again, an Oscar actor, actually.
Mm.
Not easy to get this done, especially as you're saying, really, as a studio movie, let's say, it's your feature film debut. It's an amazing
Yeah.
cast. How did you put this together? You're the producer. And how did you work with them? How did you get this tension, this triangle?
Mm.
Two men are going to fight it out, and there's a guy who's trying to say maybe this fight shouldn't be taken too far, but on the other hand, we
Mm.
have to stand for our principles with J.K. Simmons as Secretary of State Schultz. Talk to us about the triangle of characters.
Well, they really all wanted a challenge, I think, as actors. And I think that all the stuff you're talking about, that kind of tension that was inherent between their moral principles, their willingness to compromise, all those things, I think, played into this kind of interest from each of them. And it's funny you mentioned the Oscar thing because I grew up in an era where it was, Jeff was known for Dumb and Dumber and Arachnophobia and all these kind of popcorn movies. And, then I saw him in the newsroom. My first show was the newsroom, and I watched him in the newsroom and I thought, wait a second, who is this guy? Like, what is happening? How does this guy not have like three Oscars already? This is the same guy from Dumb and Dumber? Are you kidding me? And then, of course, you go back and you look, and it's Terms of Endearment, and it's Purple Rose of Cairo, and it's Something Wild. It's all, it's just endless. That's not even counting the stage, Mockingbird and everything. So, he can do anything. I think the question was really, does he want to do this? And you brought it up. You thought, apprehensive about Jeff, and you watch him, and for the first couple minutes, you see Jeff, and then you see Reagan, and it's this almost sleight of hand that he pulls off. And we talked a lot about it in prep about if because he's so well known for comedy, if we pushed it too far, then it would be an SNL skit. It would be something that was comedic, and we wanted to draw people in. And Jeff kept talking about how do we draw them in, pull them into the performance as opposed to push them away. And so part of that was an active choice of, working on the accent. He worked on the accent for months and months and months and the mannerisms, but we didn't go full head to toe makeup. We just did the hair, we did few light touches, and then all of a sudden he starts to draw you in with that performance. And then it was really just about capturing it. Then it was, my cinematographer was talking a lot about like, well, how are we going to make this, one room interesting with two guys just arguing? And I said, if we get the performance, all we got to do is capture it. We got to get in close enough and get it. And you see it in the film. I mean, these guys are one single word, one single piece of paper, one reaction. That's all. And the whole world's riding on that. And so I think you really feel it when you see it that they really did have the weight of the world on their shoulders. And, we think we're kind of combustible now, but imagine then when you got 70,000 nukes and like you said, civilization is on the line.
Yeah, I felt the same way as you're describing that. He acknowledges his Jeff Daniels, and then he becomes Reagan before your eyes, and you really buy it. The speech and the jokes are especially convincing, and the other part of it is he acts like he thinks he's Reagan, and everybody else acts like he is Reagan. And so, because you're in this
Yeah,
house for
yeah,
most of the movie, you feel like, okay,
yeah,
if they believe it, I
yeah,
believe it. I mean, it's very
yeah.
serious.
Well, and I
The
think Jeff has that kind of ineffable quality that Reagan had of that, like this kind of civility, this old-fashioned American cheerfulness and civility and moral clarity that I think, really he kind of embodies it. That's why he works. He keeps getting these jobs, with like Mockingbird is another one where like he just steps into that role and we all kind of go, okay, I believe he's got principles. I believe he's got, the idea that he can make peace at the same time as he can talk to an adversary and disagree with them.
Yeah, I think that's it's become a somewhat rare quality, and just like having a Reagan picture is incredibly rare. Even this kind of role, the notion that these are serious men who are not only trying their best, but they are aware that they're acting at the highest level of decision making, and therefore they are responsible for everybody. And
Hmm.
they conduct themselves accordingly, and you begin to see that they are ready for it. I appreciated to turn from direction to screenplay for
Yeah.
a moment the way Reagan's sense of purpose, but his preparedness in regard to the
Hmm.
brief, his dealing with his experts and
Yeah.
asserting this kind of, as you're saying, American cheerfulness, a kind of
Yeah.
confidence, a kind of optimism, even. But also, he is the chief executive officer. He's giving
Yeah.
orders here. And it's like,
Yeah.
this is a joke.
Well,
People feel at home, but he's in charge, and I think again, as the audience, you feel like he's also talking to me. But if he's in charge, then I'm relaxed.
yeah.
I know he's going to take care of things.
Yeah, I think that's 100% right. And I think he gave people confidence in that way. He gave people confidence in a way that they hadn't had for a while. And I think, and certainly something Schultz told me was that he was constantly underestimated. It was kind of a little bit of a shtick that he had that, he had this kind of avuncular uncle, grandpa presence, but that really he was an actor. So he would memorize whole briefing books. He was used to memorizing scripts. And so Schultz told a story about, and I put it in the movie about how, advisors would constantly come in thinking, okay, this is my chance to brief the president. It's my time to shine. And then they would be disappointed because he already had read everything. And so, it was one of those interesting things that I think that's the public versus the professional performance that he had. And so we try to capture that in the movie.
I think, yeah, that was maybe even more than the acting, the thing that sold me on the movie, not
Hmm.
on its artistic quality, but on its substance, so to speak. That I
Yeah.
think, okay, this guy is actually thought about who he's dealing with. Reagan is not just a
Hmm.
name or a meme to him or an opportunity to make a show. He's somehow given this thought. And then you said you have in fact interviewed the late Secretary Schultz.
Yeah.
Could you talk to me a bit about that? First of all, how did you meet him? Why did you even get the idea to do this? And what was the interview like?
Well, I mean, he was up at the Hoover Institute, which I know you
Yeah.
know, and that what had happened was years before I had written this movie about the Nunn-Lugar Amendment, which is this kind of two senators who, wrote this law basically to allow America to buy nuclear material from the former Soviet Union. And it was this huge deal at the time. There was no mechanism for America to help the former Soviet Union, Ukraine, Latvia, Lithuania with all their nuclear material. And I wrote this movie, but it happened to be based on a book by former SecDef Ash Carter and Secretary of Defense Bill Perry. And when the project fell apart, I was obviously bummed and disappointed and all those emotions. And he said, well, why don't you come up to Hoover and I'll introduce you to Schultz and in time of talking. And I was like, well, I'm not going to turn that down. Schultz is a lion in American foreign policy history. And in general, I think in general American policy history, I don't think most people realize that he was one of only two people to serve in four different cabinet positions, right? It's an incredible accomplishment. And it really shows the trust that the executive branch, I think, and the American people put in him. And I think, so I wasn't going to turn that down. And I kind of went up to talk to him and, in the Hoover Institute in the conference room. Now, I haven't been there in years, so I can't promise that it's still true now. But then at the time, in the conference room, there was this like oil painting of Reykjavik, of Hofti in the house and Reagan and Gorbachev facing off. And I asked him, like, what in the world is this? Like, as a filmmaker, immediately from the visual, you think, whoa, all the power in the world is right here in this one room. And so that was a very arresting image. And that kind of became the germ of the idea of how do you figure this out? What is that about?
That's actually my next question. It's funny I didn't. First of all, it's been a while since I've been at Hoover. I don't remember seeing the house there, but I look for it. Next time there.
Yeah.
It's what a strange thing to have run into. And again, serendipitous for the conversation because this is the other odd aspect of the movie. The world is at stake, but it all actually happens in this. Now it looks quaint. It was then
Yes.
Jugendstil Modernismus, house in
Yeah.
Reykjavik, and so you've got this frozen volcanic wasteland, and on the
Yeah.
other hand, this epitome of civilization. What is more civilized than this kind of house
Yeah.
where life can go on? But it's instead of family and a dignified life, it's this quarrel between the two leaders of the great powers, and of course, as I mentioned in the basement, there's the CIA and the KGB, which is just
Yeah.
these crazy, even hilarious aspects of the
Yeah.
storytelling, the upstairs, downstairs
Yeah.
aspect to it, just like the going between the confrontation at the table and advice with the staff and experts. It's conducted with great dignity, but there is this shuffling on and off stage aspect to the
Yes.
movie. It has a remarkably dramatic, theatrical quality to it, but in the best way, in the sense that we're also saying that somehow what the movie conveys is how dignified these people are. They
Hmm.
take seriously what they're doing more than taking themselves even seriously, but they also
Yeah.
take themselves seriously, and so they conduct themselves in this way that you almost want to say, you have to. It's worth portraying. Look at these guys.
Hmm.
If this is not worth our attention, what is?
Yes.
So it's somehow arresting, commanding, but in a reassuring and dignified way. It's almost like this surprising contrast. Here's a beautiful old-fashioned house in the middle of a volcanic frozen wasteland that is captured now and then in the movie. How did you get to film in Hofway? How did you get to do this stuff in Iceland? Talk to us a bit about it.
Well, we're really lucky. I mean, the Icelandic people were so welcoming across the board, but it's specifically in the instance of the Reykjavik, city of Reykjavik. So the house actually belongs to the city of Reykjavik, not even to the federal system that they have, but the city of Reykjavik. So first you got to go to the mayor, and he usually checks with the cultural minister. And luckily for us, both she and he were both willing to engage with us and talk with us. And we had scouted out in February of 2024 and met with each of them and talked to them, at length about what we wanted to try to do. We gave them the script so they knew that we weren't, making fun of the event or making fun of the Icelandic people. We took it very seriously. And, every single person that we encountered in Iceland was just warm and welcoming in the sense not only they knew what we were doing, but I think just in a general kind of cheerfulness and willingness to engage. And everybody who was alive at the time had a story. Our one of our production services producers was sitting on the little steps, of the local church where the motorcade went by. I told the story about being 6 or 7 and watching the American motorcade go by. And but one of the things I actually don't think I've talked about this before. So well, I mean, so Titus, you're gonna exclusive here. But one of my favorite stories was the house where we shot the ambassador's residence, where Jeff spends the night, and there's these kind of animals on the walls. So we couldn't shoot in the place because the American government had given it back to the Icelandic government. So that place is now defunct. So we had to find a location. It's one of the few times we left the house. Almost everything was shot in the Hofty house, but this time we left the house. We go and we rent this guy's house, and he's kind of an Icelandic raconteur. He's an entrepreneur. He's been an airline pilot. He's done all those things, and he starts to tell this story that he was having a birthday party. He had an American friend. They were in their 30s, and his friend's like, well, you're not going to have a birthday party? You got to have a birthday party. Come over to my house. We're going to have a birthday party. So he's got all these Americans over. He's got these Icelandic people over. They're all having a party. And there's this bang, bang, bang on the back of the door, on the back door. And his friend goes, hold on a second. He goes back and he says, oh, hello, Ivan. Good to see you. And he says, I'll be right back. And he goes back into the backyard and talks to this guy, Ivan. And he comes back in, and they all know, all the Icelandic people know, this is the CIA man in Reykjavik. They say, what was that? And he's like, oh, that's Ivan from the KGB. I can't talk about it. We got something cooking. And then a week and a half later, Reykjavik happens. And, the Reagan and Gorbachev show up. And so they all realize that the CIA and KGB have been talking, behind in the backyard, trying to figure out how in the world were they going to secure this summit. And that was probably my favorite story that we got from folks while we were there.
That's a charming story, and there is a bit of this the comedy of the absurd in the movie. That on the one hand, these are just two guys talking. On the other hand, how much security do you need for this? How much fear is
Oh,
there that God knows what might happen? And
yeah.
of course, there is a mention in the movie that Reagan had in fact gotten shot in 81. This is not
Hmm.
a trivial issue.
Yeah.
But yeah, somehow I think it's the right note to hit, because from our point of view, civilians, it's strange that people should be also worried and also prepared to make sure everything is under control. But on the other hand, it makes perfect sense. It's just going to happen to the guy on the other side of the screen. This is not
Yes.
my problem. I just have no, unless it's
Yeah.
like a situation like that party where suddenly, hey, turns out that
Yeah.
these things have to happen somewhere. Somebody has to make these
Yeah.
kinds of decisions, and
Yeah.
you're in the midst of it now. And
Yeah.
indeed, I guess to some extent, people of Reykjavik, yeah, they are not just witnesses to history, but caught up in something that
Oh,
you don't know the
absolutely.
outcome of.
Yeah.
The if it can go well, it can go ill, it can go
Yeah.
sideways.
Yeah. Well,
And
I think in America too, we're so used to security elements. We have police and we have National Guard and we have the Secret Service and we have all these things. And they don't even have a military in Iceland. Their police don't have guns. And so, they told stories about the little kids looking up and there's guys on the rooftops with rifles and they didn't know what that was. They literally didn't know what that was. And so it's kind of a surreal moment, I think, and but also very powerful. They're quite proud of the fact that peace was really formed. The relationship that ended the Cold War was formed in that house.
yeah, that's it's in between America and Russia. It's
Yeah.
precisely because it's a small, peaceful place in the middle of nowhere. It seems like the most inoffensive place to conduct things. In some sense, it's lower stakes for that reason. But as you say, it's part of this series of meetings between Gorbachev and Reagan that were
Hmm.
full of conflict, full of walking away from the table, full of disagreements,
Hmm.
but which did build this strange rapprochement that each learns to take the other seriously as a leader who is really in control of his regime, but on the other hand is not looking for things to go crazy, but will
Hmm.
also not back down.
Hmm.
And so that's again the house, the concentration on that room, this table, two guys across the table, sometimes with a
Yeah.
split screen. The You see both the intimacy and the opposition, and this mutual searching out of character.
Hmm.
It's a big theme in your script. Is this not a friend, but somebody I can, in some sense, trust?
Yes.
Is he a counterparty in this
Yes.
negotiation? Will he hold up his end of the conversation? Will he
Yeah.
hold up end of the bargain if a
Yeah.
bargain can be struck? This probing, which is necessarily somewhat skeptical, cautious, and even aggressive at times, as there are so many differences, it brings so much tension to the room.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we're sort of aware of now, and for a long time
Hmm.
since Reagan, nobody was aware of it. It seems that actually it is a few men who have to make these decisions. That
Hmm.
there's a reason America elects a president who is commander in chief also and
Yeah.
chief executive officer. It might come to a decision. People might have to say, is America a yes or a no on this? And so, of course,
Hmm.
other parts of the world, and and uh, and that somehow does get in a way to a deeper human level, or maybe just okay, not a deeper, but somehow it's universal. That in America, there's a Congress, there's a system of
Hmm.
courts, there's the presidency, there are
Hmm.
any number of other things besides. But there is a one guy making the decisions anywhere, including in a
Hmm.
place like the Soviet Union.
Hmm.
However different the political system, however different the way of life, however different freedom and tyranny are ultimately,
Hmm.
at the top there is one man who has to make the decision for peace or for war, and
Hmm.
that's because ultimately in conflict, in disagreement, one will has to unite everybody, and
Hmm.
that's how anything can be decided for peace or for war. I think that's something, again, we're sort of more aware now in the sense that there's less of a notion that impersonal, sort of unknown institutions, unknown personnel makes decisions, who knows where or
Hmm.
how, right? It's just think
Hmm.
about how many international or transnational organizations there are where you could never say who did what.
Hmm.
Whereas this was this one strange case where you know exactly who is going to decide. Is it a yes or is it a no? Who
Yeah.
says? We know exactly, and why. We know who does it and why they're doing it, what they represent. So, for purposes of drama, as much as perhaps for purposes of democracy, it's very helpful to know who is responsible here, who is the adult in the room, so to speak. And
Well,
I was very
for
struck by
drama, it's a gift. Yeah, for drama, it's a gift. I mean, Reagan said it best himself when he said, we're in a unique position in history. And as far as he was aware, and as far as I'm aware, that's never happened before. It hasn't happened since. That you had two people who could really decide the fate of the world. I think that it's one of the things that I was history undergrad, and I was stunned that I didn't know about this. I mean, to me, this is one of the most important diplomatic achievements of all time, that they were able to somehow figure out a way forward in peace when they had every reason to disagree is shocking. And so talk about the drama. I mean, Tito's, I mean, like we're talking about like every single word matters. And also I think they both came with it with the best of intentions, but their intentions are diametrically opposed. One's a communist and believes that the whole world has to be communist, and the other is wants the whole world to be liberated. And so it's a really divisive like moment in history. And we had very close calls in the Cold War. I mean, really close. I mean, everybody knows the Cuban Missile Crisis. Some people know about Able Archer in '83, but I think most people don't realize how determined the Red Army was to preventing, SDI. America had this plan to put a shield in space, and the Soviets were so terrified that the Red Army was saying, "We're going to have to go to war to stop this." So, hey, Gorbachev, you're new. You're the new guy. You got a chance here. We're going to give you a shot. That's an incredible thing that I think most of us we look back and I think we think, oh, Reagan and Gorbachev, they made peace, and Gorbachev let the Soviet Union, dissipate peacefully, and we think of him kind of as a saint in the West and that kind of stuff. But at the time, people didn't know what was going to happen. They didn't know who he was. He didn't. He was young. He came up through the agricultural system. He wasn't KGB, and so there were a lot of variables that I think we just take for granted now with history being in hindsight. And there was all those variables that walked into that room in Iceland, and we really didn't know what was going to happen.
Yeah, I think that's right. Your story captures both these aspects of Gorbachev, that he's a new guy to a significant extent, an unknown quantity, but also because he's new, also testing what his purpose in the short term has to be, and what his powers are over his own regime. There's
Hmm.
what he's in control of, and what is he supposed to do with that power. The it's I thought about another one of these charming aspects of your movies, that there's a kind of idealizing effect. It's not just that
Hmm.
Reagan is idealized, but so is Gorbachev, and then it sort of
Hmm.
shows you, so to speak, the system in its best light.
Yeah.
And that's very revealing, at least of leaders. Okay, what
Yeah.
can this system produce in the best case, and
Yeah.
it makes for heightened drama, but also for in a sense for an intellectual clarity, that you can't say people just had a bad day that day in
Yeah.
October, or it was just some kind of accident. No, people did this on purpose, and they were to a significant extent in control of events. They
Oh
were
yeah.
more aware than we are of all of the variables, all of the uncertainty, and they thought
Hmm.
there's possibly a way through all of this.
Yeah.
And the and therefore the movie captures quite well that there's a kind of, there's so much of a threat because America has come up with a new idea. You could come up with a defensive weapon. There's always some kind of dialectic, we can call it, with offensive and defensive weapons in history. At what point are arrows very important, or at what point are castles very important, or at what point
Hmm.
is
Yeah.
artillery or missiles or eventually nuclear weapons seem like
Yeah.
game over. But what if you
Hmm.
could come up with the Strategic Defense Initiative, or as it was mocked, Star Wars, which
Yes.
Star Wars was very popular, so it's not necessarily an effective mockery. People love Star Wars. but the but it if you could come up with a defensive weapon of this character, you would in a sense put away the fear of
Hmm.
nuclear war, and the and nevertheless that is incredibly threatening.
Yes.
Gorbachev does not react well to this because you can't escape the fact that somebody would be in control of the shield.
Yeah.
Uh, though it's a defensive weapon, even if it only gives you protection, since it is the
Hmm.
difference between life and death, it's a remarkable advantage to have. Now, of
Yeah.
course, there are all of these tensions that are so well brought out in the movie. Reagan is aggressive because he's a strange kind of pacifist.
Hmm.
Thatcher was shocked that he wanted to get rid of nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons
Well,
are the
he,
only thing that's kept the peace, and this guy wants to get rid of them. And also, I mean, it's easier for huge power like America than for smaller powers in Europe to deal with this kind
yes.
of change. But he did. He somehow had on the one hand this crazy reputation for a warmonger, but on the other hand was actually quite a pacifist. He wanted disarmament on the nuclear issue. He hoped somehow that all of them could be gotten rid of. And that made him willing to listen, to people like Teller, who
Hmm.
were quite
Yes.
hawkish, that actually you could technologically advance and build this new kind of defense.
Hmm.
And on the other hand, Soviets, whose entire propaganda was not just, as you were saying, like globalization of communism,
Hmm.
the classless society worldwide, or the universal homogeneous state, as it was called by Alexander
Yeah.
Khrushchev. But they were out there saying that they're for liberation and for peace.
Hmm.
And suddenly, what are they terrified of? Peace and defense. They are
Hmm.
scared of something that offers no threats,
Yeah.
ostensibly, and so they are put in a very false position, in a very strange moment where Gorbachev is incredibly angry to the point of threatening war in the name of securing peace.
Hmm.
And Reagan, on the other hand, with his warmonger reputation, he mentions the famous 5 minutes to midnight
Yeah.
hysteria, this all of this sort of press from the 80s, but is in fact looking to find peace, looking to put an end to the nuclear threat. And of course, that's we're hoping for too much. We do not have zero nuclear weapons now. It doesn't look like we'll ever will. And
Hmm.
correspondingly, we also don't have SDI.
Hmm.
But but on the other hand, it did work. Strangely enough, it did
Hmm.
mean that it's possible to point out to the Soviets that they are not able to keep up economically, technologically, and therefore
Hmm.
militarily. It forced Gorbachev for the first time to face something that's destroyed communism in Russia, at least. Famously,
Hmm.
Lenin said that right. What is communism? On the one hand, socialism. On the other hand, it's electrification of the whole country. It's like ideology, the party, terror, and on the other hand,
Hmm.
tech.
Yeah.
It's a plus. They go together. But Gorbachev
Hmm.
had to choose. It was
Yeah.
no longer possible to do both. And
Yeah.
and in some sense, his predecessors had made that choice, and the choice was keep the party, keep the ideology, even the terror,
Hmm.
but they could no longer have the tech. And
Yeah.
so, it, somehow, uh, atheist, in a sense, material scientific communism, Russia does not get the tech. But on the other hand, Christian evangelical Reagan, he can control
Yeah.
the tech. He somehow is confident. And so there's also this ideological conflict between atheism and religion in it. And the case of freedom of religion in Russia is mentioned in the story as it was in the human rights discussion in Reykjavik. So there are all of these super interesting civilizational issues that also have not played out. Like the question of
Hmm.
nuclear war is not over, the question of SDI is not over, but the question of how to deal with tech, and is it more defensive or more offensive, and
Hmm.
are we going to get religion or atheism out of it? This is
Hmm.
not over either. So I saw all of these things and I thought, wow, your movie is so timely. You have found so many of the civilizational issues in the story, and they just play out naturally in the drama that, to a large extent, is script based on the conversations. Uh,
Yes.
to what extent were you looking on the one hand, I guess it's the memes on the
Hmm.
American diplomatic side, but there's also, a lot of stuff published from the Soviet side in recent years. How
Well,
did you
it's
deal with the sources and coming up with a story that includes all of these issues out of what was, pretty dry stuff? I mean, you're not.
well, I mean, I think, the research portion of it, you read everything you can, right? You read every single thing you can get your hands on. And then in the storytelling aspect of it, so much of it was, as you said, is still relevant today. We're dealing with you know, a world where the treaties that were kind of built coming out of Reykjavik are now ending, right? They're expiring, and so now China's building their arsenal. Russia's threatening tactical nukes. So the world is changing back into the more dangerous place that Reykjavik was living through, and so I think that is one thing. The universality of the stuff you're talking about with religion versus atheism, or the questions about what do we do with tech, is it offensive or defensive? We're dealing with that every day with AI, right? And so it's one of these things where I think these universal themes are just a piece of the human condition, and what the movie depicts, I think, is what do you do about that? What you can't do, I think, is made very clear by the fact that you can't refuse to engage with other people. If you refuse to engage with other people, you end up in a situation that you definitely cannot control. You have to be willing to engage with other people and have the courage and confidence, to engage with somebody, even if you disagree with them, because otherwise we all just we live in our silos and we're fearful. And you alluded to it really early on when you said we're all on our phones, we're getting individually developed feeds and screens and things like that. And so we have to find a way to have common conversation. We have to find a way that the universal themes that we all care about, whether it's our families, our communities, whatever, those haven't really changed. And the same thing I think is true in terms of Reagan and Gorbachev, where they had very different views on what was best for humanity. But the one thing they knew for sure was that humanity should come first. And I think that's a really profound moment in history for them to both be so committed to their systems and their philosophies, and then be willing to say, you know what, even if we disagree, we agree that there's this one thing that we can do to make the world a better, safer place. And that was the reduction of arms. Again, something never happened in human history. It's crazy to me to think about. And, you mentioned castles and bow and arrows and all these things. And never before in human history have we agreed to just voluntarily, give up the siege towers, or give up, the blowgun, or the crossbow. Like, nobody had ever said, you know what, guys, let's just not do the crossbow. Right. So imagine for a second that you had, 40 plus years of policy based on nuclear weapons. And then all of a sudden, a couple of guys in a room in Iceland go, maybe there's a better way. Maybe we can just reduce those. And so we now live in the legacy of an infinitely safer world that Reagan and Gorbachev built. But did they get all the way? No. That's on us. That's on our children to keep having those debates and trying to figure out a way forward. And it's going to be a lot harder now. I think we got a multipolar world. We've got the China, we've got North Korea. There's a lot more to deal with now. And so I think what I hope the movie inspires is that it inspires young people, to go out, have the conversation with the people who are older than them that lived through it, and really figure out, how do we move forward? How do we engage with the world?
Yeah, I think you're basically right about this. I watched the movie and I immediately asked myself, would it be imaginable that such a summit would happen now, 5 years ago, 5 years from now? It's just somehow
Yeah.
much harder to think about this.
Yeah.
We are somehow thinking that. we don't know what tech we're going to build, and we're kind of scared. But also,
Hmm.
on the other hand, it's very scary even to think we're getting another Cold War. It's not going to be Soviet Russia. It's going to be China. In some sense, the same
Hmm.
communism. In some sense, it's a different way of life,
Hmm.
different way of thinking. That how do we even grasp this?
Hmm.
It's so foreign. We're not used to it. We don't even have enough to work with to figure out why are we so different. But
Hmm.
and in that sense, we are merely at the beginning of
Yes.
a process that, if you know, God willing, everything works out, that could end up with something like Reagan
Hmm.
Gorbachev meetings,
Yeah.
summits, Reykjavik, and so on. That would be the closest to a happy end that is imaginable right now. So, in a
Yeah.
strange way, the 80s are timely again. Reagan is timely. Gorbachev is timely again,
Yeah.
and the story you're telling it does seem to have this. It has this all-American quality of American hopefulness, of
Yeah.
the belief that engagement, dialogue, seriousness yield good results.
Hmm.
But also it has the tension, the more thriller-like aspect, even to the
Yeah.
negotiations, this incredible awareness that it's not just, like, do you want to attack your enemies? That might scare them. Do you want to not attack them and just defend yourself? This could also scare
Hmm.
them. Something
Yeah.
like what is going to destroy the Soviet Union? Is it their own problems, the economy, the terror, what have you? That's part of it. But what if the prestige of America, the new American rearmament and tech, is
Hmm.
going to undermine confidence at home and collapse the
Yeah.
regime? What is that going to lead to? Like, who
Yeah.
knows?
Who knows?
Seeing the complexity of these events, that you have to enter the conflict with clarity about all of these things, that aggressive as well as defensive moves can be scary to an adversary,
Hmm.
that the competition of ideology or beliefs on the one hand, but on the other hand, simply economic, technological, material facts can undermine or improve confidence, and therefore threaten a regime, or
Hmm.
scare, military,
Hmm.
political types into God knows what.
Hmm.
The complexity of these things, it's much more pleasant in a way, orchestrated in the argument between these two men, than to think about, you mentioned Able Archer. NATO is doing
Yeah.
some kind of war games, and they don't let the commies know about what's going on. And so suddenly you have the fear that maybe this isn't war games, maybe this is the real thing,
Yeah.
and troops are about to start
Yeah.
rolling east. Well, this could again be the end of the world, but it has
Yeah.
shocking, but it has a kind of meaninglessness to it. It's just okay. Some kind of mistake was made in this huge movement of
Hmm.
troops and weapons. Whereas in this case, it's so meaningful because it is two people who seem both civilized and at the peak of their regimes, thinking about humanity and what is the best decision for it, as you were saying.
Hmm.
Does humanity have content that binds you, that somehow you realize there are limits to what you can do?
Hmm. Well, and
Very.
I think too, like Tito's, one of the things I want to impress upon the listeners too is that it's hard to fathom for us now how much fear exists in the Soviet Union over American tech. There's a wonderful book that a British historian came out with, I want to say last year or something. I want to say his name is Calder, but it really struck me because he talked about how in the Soviet times, and especially in the 80s, something absurd, like 80% of their tech or more was coming from the West. The washing machines, and literally the washing machines, the carburetors. We're not even talking about missiles. And so there was really this complete terror, I think, on the Soviet side, that if American tech was allowed to continue, that who knows what would happen, what would they would come up with. And so I think anytime, to your point, that you've got a misunderstanding between two sides, whether it's Able or Archer, or whether it's related to technology, it really creates a lot of fear. And we went to the Carnegie Institute in DC, the Carnegie Foundation for Peace, to talk about the film and to show the film. And one of the guys on the panel said to me after, he's like, I just got back from China, and you better believe they are terrified of us and AI. They think we're going to use AI to just hack them to bits. And so it's one of those things where I think, again, coming back to what you said earlier, the universality of these themes is just really still relevant today. This film is pointing at things that we're all still dealing with right now.
Yeah, and I think that's a great note to end on. That's it's impressive to see that aside from your artistic credentials as producer, director, and writer of your movie, you're also a history major and interested in all of the political issues as well. I'm very pleased that you're taking the movie and showing it in institutes. I think more of that is needed. I was impressed that we just don't have a lot of thinking about art in terms of national memory. This
Here,
does
here.
do that. This does restore the national memory. This does restore the national figures, conflicts, the issues, and how we prevailed. And that's surely needed, as we have said. So it's a perfect note to end on. Michael Russell Gunn, thank you again for coming on the podcast. I hope your movie is a success. And everybody out there, it's out there in theaters. Angels is distributing this. Just go out there and see The Brink of War. See Jeff Daniels as Reagan. It's going to be great. Just takes a few minutes and then you're spellbound. So go see the movie. It's a wonderful thing to have in theaters. Thanks very much and all the best until our next conversation.